Welcome to Collector's Corner, the premier digital art platform.
We help collectors gain and maintain their edge, all while appreciating beautiful art.
Let's jump in. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Collector's Corner. We have another artist corner with the fantastic Jeff Ippsketch. Not his real last name, which I was kind of sad to hear because that would be awesome. But it's an awesome name, and we're so glad to have Jeff with us today because we're a huge fan of your work. And for folks who are listening who may not know, go check out @Ippsketch. Check out his link tree. He's very well known for the Artblocks Curated Bent, which is a fantastic collection. But we're really, really happy to have you here, Jeff. How are you doing today?
Good, thanks. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. And as always, joined by my great friend and co-host, founder of 8NAP Digital Asset Fund, Jared, who you may know online as @Jared_pause. Jared, how are you today?
Living the dream, man. I got all dressed up in my 3-piece suit today with my party pants on. So it's an exciting day. I can't wait to actually have a conversation with Jeff. It's a long time coming. We've been chasing you down since Marfa in November. So I'm glad this was able to finally come to fruition.
Me too.
Likewise. And you may notice, so my name is P. You may know me online as @AstonCloud. I don't have my video on. I'm not living the dream today, a little bit under the weather. So I, for once, am going to talk a little bit less and listen to these fine gentlemen. And since they're both so much more handsome than me, I'm glad to be off camera today. So a good day for that. And for everybody who's listening, this is a video episode. Try to check it out on YouTube. We'll be showing off some art and get to see both Jeff and Jared. And also, if you can't, that's okay. It'll be a podcast. And please check us out on Twitter @collectors_XYZ. Give us a follow, give us a like, and sign up for our newsletter, our Substack newsletter. We've been trying to get more folks into Gen Art and keep up with the space with our weekly episode there. So that's enough of the house cleaning. And let's go ahead and jump in. Jeff, just would love to hear a little bit about your background and sort of anything you think that's kind of relevant growing up to where you are now as a generative artist.
Sure, yeah. So let's see. I'll start with I'm a mechanical engineer by training. So that's I have a full-time job. That full-time job is mechanical engineering of implantable medical devices. So in that work, I do a lot of simulation. So I write a lot of code to simulate a lot of engineering things, devices, cardiovascular systems, things of that nature. So I have a really strong background in problem solving and coding and simulation, and then in data visualization of the results. So I kind of consider that like my really good foundation for algorithmic generative art or creative coding. Because creative coding is a lot of writing code. It's a lot of problem solving, like trying to figure out how to write the code to do something on the screen. And it's kind of a lot of data visualization. There's information in the code that you're trying to put up on the screen and share in a certain way. And that is like a form of data visualization. So I see those as very much like coupled together.
This is so cool. And I know I said I was going to talk a bunch and then right away I'm talking, but in undergrad, I studied biomed engineering. I was at the University of Southern California, and we were much more of a mechanical engineering focused program. So that is right up my alley. Lots of friends from there went to work at Edwards Life Sciences or other places like that. So I got to ask you, what kind of medical devices do you focus on if you have a focus?
Yeah, so I'm working on an implantable blood pump. It's a pump. It could be pumping oil. It could be pumping water. It just so happens to be pumping blood. Blood is very difficult to pump. It's fragile. It clots easily. The pump can't fail or the patient dies. I mean, it's a very challenging problem, but it's a fun problem.
Interesting.
And it's something that I feel like it's worthwhile too. It's like fun to work on a medical device that could potentially be saving people's lives. We're not clinical with our device yet, but like we're not in people yet, but we hope to be soon. And so yeah, it's really fun. It's a fun job. It's a fun environment to work in, for sure.
Oh, that's really cool. Sorry, one more question on this. what kind of clinical use cases are there? Because I went to med school after biomed engineering, so now I'm like a pump. When would you? Is this like for people who
At
are
some
getting
point,
like?
somebody's going to be able to find me and my real name, but
Oh, okay. Sorry, you don't
it's
have
fine.
you don't
No,
have
no,
to.
it's
That I'm
fine.
just curious.
They're called ventricular assist devices.
Got it.
They're implantable blood pumps. They're for people who need a heart transplant, but they're not going to live long enough to get one because their heart's failing. And donor hearts are few and far between because only so many healthy people die in motorcycle accidents a year, for example. So the patients get these pumps to bridge them to a transplant. The
Got it.
most famous person that's gotten one is Dick Cheney. So you can, which he really was like a robot then. That's the most famous person who's gotten one. You can look up that like news article and see read
Right.
more. That wasn't our pump, but that was a similar device.
The full cyborg transformation. No, an
Yeah.
LVAD for folks who are in
Yes.
the lingo and listening. Okay, that's awesome. Well, I'll shut up for real now.
Okay.
I wanted I mean, certifiable badass in your real life, and in your artist life. Do a lot of people know about all of your success in the digital art world, or is this kind of like two separate verticals, which is really intriguing?
It's very much two separate verticals, and that was kind of by accident to begin with. I was making art for fun. I was sharing that art on Twitter just for fun, and I had to pick a Twitter name, and I did not want to be searchable kind of as my normal, by my normal name, because that's kind of my professional engineering career, and I just wanted to kind of have a separate creative outlet for myself. And so I picked Ippsketch. It stands for I++ sketch because I++ is a coding term. I use it in every single code I write, as do most coding people.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a nod to the code behind the art. And so yeah, I picked that, so they've been kind of divergent and separate, and it was kind of by accident, but then I kind of kept it on purpose. And that's been like a kind of a struggle for me, like to kind of remain pseudo anonymous. I mean, like my face is here, so I'm not like super anonymous, but to have these like two different arms of my life is it's been interesting and challenging, and
A challenge for sure. I know P and I both play in that same realm. And when I started to have more of a Web3 personality, I actually deleted my LinkedIn. Little known fact, and for that exact reason. Before we move on, I really want to get into like your history growing up. But one of the things that I'm really fascinated with is your PFP, which seems to be the king of spades with a really cool pair of shades. When you were starting your Twitter, what's the story behind this?
yeah. Let's see. So I think one reason I picked that was because I kind of felt like creative coding or generative art, like writing the code, kind of felt like a game to me in like the best possible sense. Like games are things that we do kind of for fun. They're things that can really like engage our minds and really help us grow and learn. And so it was very much like, it felt like a challenging game to like come up with like a looping GIF that would be less than 15 megabytes, so I could put it on Twitter. It felt like a challenging little puzzle for me. And so I kind of leaned into that game thing. And I also made some like looping GIF playing cards on Hicketnunk, like, back in the Hicketnunk days. And that's when I think I picked that King of Spades. And now it's just kind of like momentum, or, I feel bad changing it because that's almost how people know me.
Yeah, it's
And
like the self-identifier, right? Like,
yeah,
I'm the same way. I've got my squiggle PFP, and it's like, damn it, I'm never gonna be able to sell this thing because it's just it's everywhere, right?
right.
So for you, I mean, you have this like vertical and the silo in your life of art. Has an artistic output been a part of your life, like while growing up?
No, I mean, like I think almost all kids, right? Like I loved art in school. I loved making art, but I never felt very good at it. It just felt very technologically challenged, or like I don't know, like I just never got proficient to the point where I was happy with what was being produced. And I did get into watercolor for quite a while, like 10 years ago or something, and really tried to dig in deep with that. And it was just kind of a frustrating process for me to put on the page what I had in my mind. And so I never really pushed it as far as I think I would hope that I could have, but I always really wanted to.
It's interesting because growing up, I as P was an engineering through an engineering student through university, and growing up, I loved art. I mean, I was. And it's funny you mentioned watercolors, and that had a resonance with me because I did a lot of watercolor and sketching, and I once, academics started to take over. I completely abandoned it. So it's partly why I'm so drawn to this area, this space, so to speak. And I love connecting with artists is because, especially with somebody like yourself, finding this balance between coding and real life and then an outlet through art has just been this really amazing cross section, in this Venn diagram of like technical and artistic outlet. It ends up being these really brilliant overlaps that I'm just absolutely fascinated with. And I find that interesting because, correct me if I'm wrong, but on a lot of your Twitter stuff, you with your children do a lot of art and different activities. Is that not correct?
Well, a little bit. I mean, one of my children made this one. Like they love art. They make art. My son's like super into drawing. He just got Procreate and some animation apps on his iPad, and he's like digging way into that. And yeah, both my daughters too are enjoy art, and one's a dancer, like that's a form of art too. And so yeah, my kids do love art. I don't know how much they love my art, but they do love making art.
No, it's just cool that like you've been able to take something that was a passion and you've been successful or had success at and able to like integrate it into their experience growing up. It's as a new father, I have a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. It's something that I'm trying to do more myself. So I admire what you're doing by bringing this holistic view to everyone around your household.
At that age, you just got to keep them alive. Like that's the focus.
That's more of my wife, man. Like she's way better at this parenting thing than me. I just try.
Yeah.
So you picked up a lot of this stuff in, call it the last 10 to 15 years, but you've been coding for some time. Can you tell me tell us a little bit about how you got to maybe generative art and specifically, I'm looking at a lot of your super rare and foundation stuff on one of my screens right now. And we can start digging into a lot of your art specifically, but I really, really enjoy some of your one-of-one pieces and maybe your journey into digital art. And then also maybe you as an artist, how do you think about like a long form generative versus one-of-one? And like, what is it that's like top of mind for you in the whole process of putting your art out there?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So I'll start with the first part, which is kind of how I got into digital art a little bit. So as I was saying, like the process of like watercolor, for example, was really frustrating for me because I could never really get on the page what I saw in my mind. And like I never just felt proficient in it. And it always felt like a struggle. And so like painting with pigments was what that is. And like painting with pixels, which I feel like is what digital art is, felt much more like achievable to me. Like, I understand the code, I understand exactly what it's doing. I understand if I want that one pixel to be that specific color, I can make it that. And like that level of control, I think probably it's some of my engineering brain. I really like that aspect of digital art. And of course, there's introducing randomness and noise and all those things, but still you're controlling those. And if you want to make a new one, you just refresh the screen, like instead of tearing the page out and spending another 2 hours trying to do the same thing. So that like iterative loop being much faster, and feeling like I could do it much more proficiently was really what pushed me into digital art. You know, it leaned into my strengths that I was already good at, which was coding. And so that's how I really, and it was a creative outlet for me. So I just like to do it for fun. And then until I got, more serious about it. And then the second part of your question was about.
It was more about how do you delineate, or what is maybe some of the philosophies you have behind maybe like a long form generative, and then the one of one, because I mean again, full disclosure, your super rare piece I absolutely adore, and I think it's beautiful. I'm mad that I missed out on it, but I think it's absolutely beautiful. And just kind of like, how do you look at that? Because it's I feel like, and I might be wrong here, but I feel like it's two different approaches to art.
Yeah, that's a hard distinction to draw for me a lot of times. I feel like everything I'm making now is generative in the sense that, it's using randomness, and it's the screen's refreshable, and each time it's new. But then there's like, how new is it and how much variation is there? Definitely come into play. So it's really hard. I mean, like, long form's much more difficult, of course. You have to program in a lot more variability. Like I strive in my long form, I typically strive for each piece like being distinct. Like you can look at the piece and which collection it's a part of, but you also know that you haven't seen it before because it's like a different piece of the collection. And whereas some other long forms, it's like they all kind of start to blend together at some point. And that's not a critique, that's just the way that I think about long form. And so some algorithms just naturally can't do that, I think, or the way they're set up. And I mean, I think that's the main thing, is like I write the algorithm, I start loving the results, and if it feels like something that's got like a lot of variation that's already in there or could be put in there, then I start thinking about long form. But if not, then I'm happy to make it a one of one piece. And then typically I'll curate, like I'll make 500 of them or 100 of them, and look and curate the selection. It's also nice doing that because you don't have to be so careful with the code. Like when you're making a long form project and the mints are going to be blind and each one has to be good, you have to really set guardrails on the algorithm to make sure that there aren't bad outputs.
Yeah, that's something that the more we talk to artists, I think I've teased this out once or twice, but I'm really fascinated. I want to like get into coding and do a drop one of these days myself. Just no freaking time. But those guardrails that you speak of, I think is a real. I think it's part of the secret sauce to a lot of successful projects, is allowing the algorithm to expand and have these parameters that are vast enough to capture attention, but yet tight enough to really not allow for anything that's a little too undesired. I mean, I admire a great project because I think it's so undervalued as to how well curated it has to be and meticulous on the code to do that. So that comes from a very uninformed, never have coded perspective. But the more and more we talk to generative artists, the more it becomes very apparent that having those parameters, it's critical, but at the same time, like you got to let it breathe, and finding that push pull becomes very, very it just becomes so tight knit, but yet it's like a walking contradiction, right? Like you're constantly being pulled in all these different directions, which is actually a fairly decent segue. I know P's looking to get in here, but I'm just jiving, and I apologize. But like, I'm really intrigued because like going off of that algorithm, like Bent is over 1,000 pieces versus Imposter Syndrome, which is only 100. Like I mean, I think the algorithms and the outputs are, I think, scaled appropriately. So that's the punchline, right? But what was some of the thought process behind, one versus the other?
Yeah, Bent. Yeah, there's over 1,000. And again, what I was striving for there was a lot of variability, and each piece being like unique. And, you know, I didn't achieve that perfectly. There are a few that kind of blend together and look fairly similar, but there are a lot that stand out to where you see it and you know you haven't seen it before. And so yeah, that algorithm I worked for I think like 8 months on. I mean, it was a monster of a project. Like it's a lot of work to like I mean, to make it look good is challenging, but then also to add all of the variability that you want, and then also all the guardrails, and then also making the code as short as possible. You know, there's all these challenges that require a lot of time. And imposter syndrome, though, it's extremely simple. Like the art itself is very basic. Like before leading up to the drop, I got people to critique it, like uh and who was it? Peter Pasma really went off, like in a fun way. Like, you know, my 5-year-old could have made this kind of comments. Like there were a lot of those because it is a very simple algorithm, and there's only a few colors, there's only 3 shapes, and so it's very limited into the possibilities of outputs that it could be. I think it was only like 3 shapes, 3 color combos, and 6 colors. It was only like 50 something possible unique combinations. And so that really limited the scope of that project a lot. And I did think about making that a lot bigger, because I thought about like set building to where somebody could get like all the colors that were available or all the shapes, but decided in the end to make it, you know, smaller and let the algorithm kind of hold itself up like that.
That's cool that you're able to get the artist feedback. That's one of the things that I've noticed about some of these great outputs is the community starting to be develop around artists. I mean, Peter's obviously amazing in his own right, and being able to get that feedback and just the sheer collaboration has been really invigorating for this space. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, the collaboration's been great. Peter and I actually collaborated very specifically on a project together on FX Hash, Planet Air, it was called. You know, Peter is like a wizard with ray marching or ray hatching or whatever it's called. This, you know, it gets outside of my comfort zone. Shaders, complicated equations I can't understand. So he did that like crazy 3D aspect, and I did like the simple color geometries that were laid on top of those. So it was it was really fun to collaborate. And that is like a new thing that's kind of come about, or it's been made easier in this. The technology's made that possible. Like we shared code, you know, and we're working on code at the same time, and that was a lot of fun.
Oh man, this is so interesting to hear about the process and the collaborations and how you're thinking about it. And really, so first, I really appreciate you sharing this. I know that IELTS get a lot out of hearing artists talk about this stuff. I wanted to take it back a little bit and ask you, you know, how did you find Web3? You know, how did you find these artist communities? Like what was that story of your discovery and deciding to jump in? And as a part of that, what happened to your art practice? Did it change as you entered the community?
Yeah, so I mean, I started out in terms of digital art in the kind of infinite looping GIF arena or field or whatever. Who is it? Bees and Bombs, David White. He's kind of, Bees and Bombs is his Twitter handle. Like he's kind of the most famous looping giffer out there, I guess. I think I just like randomly came across one of his works on Twitter or something and got like, it was just mesmerizing. Like it's really fun to watch these infinite looping GIFs because they're very limited in terms of like how long they actually are. But they're just like really fun to watch. And I got hooked, and like that's when I really started treating it like a really fun game to try to make my own. So that's how I got like first into the Twitter space. And then I started becoming exposed to more of the Web3 art when it was pretty early, like in the Hic et Nunc days. I got involved with that crowd and was minting some work on Hic et Nunc. And I think the first, you know, long form project I saw was Subscapes, Matt Delorier's Subscapes. I think that was the first one that I, you know, somebody like retweeted or something. And then I like read his articles that he wrote about that, and like got hooked and dove in. And I think that was my introduction to it.
How did you find Hikat Nunk in the first place? Just like forums and stuff like that?
It was it's all through Twitter for me. Like once I got into like that looping GIF community, like there was a lot of overlap there with the Hikat Nunk community. And then once I was in that Hikat Nunk community, there was a lot of overlap with starting to be like Artblocks and longer form.
That's awesome. And you know, a lot of artists who start on Tezos stay on Tezos. What made you decide to go for Artblocks and go through that process?
Yeah, so at the time, it was July of 2021 when I applied for Artblocks. It was really the only long form option available. FX Hash wasn't out at the time. I think it came out later that year, like October or November of 21. So it was really the only, possible place to put it at the time. I mean, I'm sure there were some other ones, but that was the main one at the time. And in terms of the whole Tezos and Ethereum, like, I mean, I have less of a dog in that fight. Like, I don't have too strong of opinions about the longevity of either chain. I mean, I'm sure one's probably going to be longer than the other one, but I'm not too. I don't know. The art is my focus, and I think about it more like diversifying collector bases myself. So I like to be on both because I know there's some collectors who only like to be on both. And my goal is to make more art and to share more art and to get it into more people's hands. And so being on both chains is beneficial for that, I think.
I love that you said diversifying collector bases. Literally just have been having conversations, had one today, talking about this and how this is, I think important is a hard word for me to say, but I think it's certainly useful to do that on multiple levels, and it helps grow that community if you think of your collector base as a community as well. And so I love that you thought of it that way. And just got to ask you, is that something that you continue to think about? And if so, how do you try to be deliberate with that?
Yeah, it is. So in terms of the chains, I don't think about that too much. I do think about maximizing my collector base in terms of output. And I think that for me, I think I read an So I read an Art Gnome article, maybe, I don't know, 2 years ago, a year ago, where it was about like how to be a successful artist, I think is the title of it. And it's like, release as much work as you possibly can. It's kind of the take-home message. And he's got like a cool graph on there that shows like all these famous artists that you've heard of. But then two at the end, it's like Andy Warhol and Picasso, who are just like, everybody knows those names. And it was a chart of how many works they had released. And Andy Warhol and Picasso were like orders of magnitude more than everybody else. They just released and sold a ton of work. And because the more people who collect, the more, your name is out there, the more familiar everybody is with you. And so I've kind of latched onto that approach rather than kind of trying to think about artificial scarcity or, really trying to maybe playing a lot of games with like how I withhold things or do things in that way. Like it's kind of my goal to make as much art as I can at different price points too. Like, I mean, I'm not upset that I sell some things on FX Hash for like 5 Tez, that's different than like Bent. It's a very different algorithm. It's a very different project. And so I like having also various price points too with my work.
Oh man,
not everybody can collect a Bent, but most people can get like a 5 Tez sketch or something.
Yeah, I love this, and I also remember one of the sketch projects you had. I can't remember which letter it was afterwards that you released, and I also can't remember the platform, but it was like early FX Hash params style where you could re-roll it and tweak some of the different parameters. I had a lot of fun with that one. But I'm sitting here nodding my head because I love what you're talking about. I think of it in the same way. is I think you can think of your collector base as a pyramid, and you have the base that could be, folks who can't afford something really expensive. Maybe you release it on, a Tezos platform, another like cheaper blockchain that has like lower gas, etc. And then you, at the other end, you have your one of ones that you probably kind of curate towards the higher end collectors. And then you have some stuff in the middle there. And that builds like a nice tranched collector base. And you see this happening, I think, somewhat organically with some of the bigger artists. Like you look at Xcopy. I mean, nothing Xcopy has is cheap, but relatively speaking, he's got his one of ones, and then he's got the Max Paynes, etc. So I love the way that you are thinking about diversifying it in that way. Man, I completely forgot. I had a follow-up question, but got distracted by that thought as well. But I think this is fantastic for other artists to hear, and also collectors. Yes, the note about, I'm curious in that ArtGnome article, because this as an engineer and somebody who deals with statistics. What's missing in that analysis is how many people released a ton of work but didn't gain notoriety, right?
Sure.
And my guess is not too many, but obviously like Picasso and Warhol could drive demand. But there's a question of, how much of that demand was driven because they had more availability. And I think about this a lot because I don't know the answer. We talk a lot about supply in this industry, but there's this network effect that happens when you have a lot of work out there that's hard to quantify. And we're like 2 years in Web3 art. So it's really hard to say what the true dynamics are going to be once this industry like grows and gets to scale.
Yeah, that article, I mean, first of all, that article, like I didn't look behind. Yeah, I'm sure you're right. There's tons of artists who have released tons of work who have not made it that big. And there's tons of artists who have released smaller amounts, probably, who did make it quite a bit bigger than some of those other people. So there is that aspect. I think more the main thing for me is like I make the art and I have it, and it's like it's on my computer and I like it and I want to share it, and I can either like hold on to it and try to like work it into something else, or I could share it and put it out there and let people collect it if they want to. And it's more about that for me. Like it's more about making the art and letting people collect the art if they want to. It's less about like the strategizing of how to become the most successful Web3 artist I can. It's more about like getting the art out there for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't mean it to say, hey, you're making a big mistake, Jeff. Like I have no idea. Right. I don't know the answer. But I think that article shows that it's not a death sentence to release a lot. And that's like the takeaway I would have with that, which is perhaps some people think that's the case.
Yeah, they might. And it might, in this space, it might be like it might be a bad idea. But it's still what I want to do. Like it's still what I want to do artistically. And I think that's the driving force behind it more than more than trying to figure out if it's going to make me successful or not.
I can appreciate that because it's authentic to yourself and authentic to your collectors. I think it's one of the things that, I'm a full disclosure, my personal bags have a substantial amount of different sketch projects in it. I'm a huge collector of Sketch E as an elephant specifically. It was my favorite out of the group. And and I think that there's something to be said about that. Like I really, and that's part of what I love about the space is the authenticity that you can bring to it, right? There's no real reason. And I think that even though there may be a vein of consistent output through Picasso or Warhol, whoever, like we're in this new space. And it's something that P and I talk about all the time of like, hey, Uber broke the barriers of certain things, that were taxis, and it challenged the traditional thinking. And I think that, as we move forward in the adoption behind art, I think my personal philosophy is that we're on this precipice of a renaissance where art is embraced more. And I think that, when you're able to do that, having art out there that is authentic to your approach is going to have a deeper resonance with people. And I think that that's something to be admired. And very frequently we don't take the time to to reflect on, in my opinion. And as you are putting your art out there almost in this selfish fashion, I admire that you're able to do it, because there's usually so many pressures for economics or collectors or this and that. It sounds like you're really being authentic to yourself. I did want to go back to the Tezos stuff, and because I have such a deep fascination with your sketch series,
Mhm.
is there, I mean, for anybody who's listening, there's sketch A through F. So A is an apple through F is in Frank. Are you, or was there any sort of throughput or common theme across the progression of these? Because I mean, just visually, I feel like my little monkey brain is able to sense some of it. But what the hell, we got you here, so we might as well ask the pertinent question.
Yeah, so the sketch series on FX Hash, yeah, there's A, B, C, D, E, F. There's 6 of them now, and the idea was that, you know, when I code, typically when I like code an algorithm, I kind of reach these like waypoints along the way where it's like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like this is, I like this, what I've generated here, but it's not exactly what I want in the end. And so I kind of like copy it to a subfolder, and it just kind of decays on my hard drive. You know, just like sits there and never gets shown to the world. And so the idea was that as I reach these like points where I'm like, oh, I like this, but it's not done yet, to kind of hit the pause button and to share it and to mint it. And that was the idea behind it. And I think it's still the idea, but I'm kind of stuck on F at this point. I think that I still want to move it a little bit further, but they all do. So they all have a grid. They're all, yeah. I mean, A was a very simple, like it was just kind of it was meant to be like this is the framework I'm using. Like here's the framework. It's a grid. And then B kind of moves on to making things more colorful and using the grid in a certain way. C also does that. It kind of breaks up the grid a bit, but they all have this grid. They're all using a grid, and because I tend to use grids a lot in my practice. I mean, they're very structured. That might be by engineering. Like I love Excel. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what it is. I just put that together. Yeah,
Staring at Excel too long does a lot of stuff to your brain, man. Holy cow.
But it's a grid, but then it starts like being, you know, deformed and morphed and shaped in certain different ways. So that was kind of that's the single through point put to all of them is a grid.
Yeah, no, you can clearly see the progression. I particularly like E, not only for the paletting, but just, you know, I was a civil engineer, and you almost could feel like the bricks coming together in that, within that grid system and stacking. But specifically, I forget what the trait is. There's one that like is almost like a reverse gravity, where instead of stacking from the bottom up, it went from the top down. So there was just some really cool outputs, and I've always loved, and this isn't, you know, like your beauty is in some of the simplicity and how things come together. And I think you really got to see that through Imposter Syndrome. And I don't know, I'm just a really big fan of your work. I really do love the fact that you're able to put something out there for every price point. And for anybody who's listening and hasn't checked out Ippsketch or has been living under a rock and hasn't seen any of it, I mean, there's really great outputs. As a matter of fact, you know, a couple, I'm part of the Proof Collective, and there's been a couple people in there who are, you know, have either like gotten their kids into generative art or art, and your pieces are actually some that I've just gifted to others in the space, because I feel like it's a really good entry point to a lot of collectors, and especially in, oh, and speaking of gifting, it's because, if correct me if I'm wrong, but Sketch F was actually a gift to your collector. So I've actually passed on most of my, I think I don't know, I had to have had like a dozen of them. I've passed on all of them except for one that was like my beloved one, and shared them with like different levels of collectors, because I thought it was somewhat poetic. You gifted it to your collectorship to be able to pass that on. So one, I guess I've never had the opportunity to say this, but thank you for all of your generosity. But B, I think that that's kind of the beauty of the space, where you're able to really embrace some of the artist's intent, and in your own way allow it to live and pay it forward, if that makes any sense. And what's really cool is the blockchain is there to, not that you need the validation, but to allow you to show some of that. So I'm on a little soapbox and a tirade, but that really gets me into my enthusiasm for your art. Kind of like leads me to the next question for you, which is, what excites you about art in the future, and where do you anticipate Ippsketch going, artistically speaking?
Good question. So I think that the way that I typically work on my art, I think is kind of the way I think about this too, is like I almost never have like a really a fully formed like concept in my head when I start working on something. Like I don't know if I have that like thing where I can't form mental pictures. I just learned about this. Like I don't know if I have this like deficiency, but I don't know necessarily what I want a sketch to look like. I mean, I have some general vague ideas and things, but it's not usually until I get in there and I start like coding the thing and I start looking at outputs and then seeing like mistakes that I make and kind of grabbing onto those and then watching it evolve as I work on it. Um, that's really like that's really how I work. Um, Things come about through mistakes, through like serendipitous like happenstance in the code. And it's almost like it's almost like I'm working with the machine to produce this thing like that I wasn't expecting in the first place. Which I think is a unique, I don't know if everybody works that way in generative art, but that's very much the way I work. And I mean, I think the same is probably for my like artistic future. Like I don't really know. I just know that I love to make the art and that I love to make the algorithms and that I'm going to keep learning and pushing it and seeing where it takes me. But I don't have like a master plan at this point.
Well, I love that as well, as someone who started a podcast with no master plan. We'll see what happens, but we do have some history. So if you're up for it, we'd love to share the screen over here and talk through some of the works that you've had and hear
Yeah.
about what in with the benefit of hindsight, what you were trying to tease out and what techniques you've been working on while showing the listeners a bunch of your beautiful art.
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right, awesome. So I will just go ahead and screen share here. For some reason, I was right in front of me, of course. So we'll screen share. And I had cheated and been on your foundation site here. But what I'll first just everybody again, like check out Jeff's Twitter page. He's at Ippsketch, IPP sketch. Give him a follow. He's awesome. He's got some, we'll get to these. You got some great work in progresses that you've been teasing here. So it's a great place to see what Jeff is up to. And a link to there is his Linktree account, which links to his website as well as different places where his works were released and can be found for purchase. So perhaps we'll jump over to your website because this is a beautiful site that you've put together. And maybe we'll go down to the bottom because I think it kind of goes chronologically here. You got some autoglyphs-esque work here. Wherever you'd like to start, just tell me where you'd like me to direct stuff, and I'll go ahead and navigate through your journey here and then some of your earlier works.
If you click into the wave frames, the middle bottom, these were also some looping GIFs that I did, and that was kind of my segue into that. That's kind of where I started, and this was actually my first mint on Ethereum. These went to the funny guys, and so this was those well, they're MP4s here, of course, but those were the first things I released on Ethereum, and then there's also the stills that went with them, and those were kind of my transition, I guess, into like image art instead of like motion art. So this was kind of the beginning of the Ethereum journey, anyway.
And why did you decide to transition from motion, or what made you decide to try out the still art?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that some of it was, I was like working in this little in this like looping GIF constraint, which was like 15 megabytes. It wasn't generative either. It was just like creative coding. It was like, I think the term that I use the most. It was every time you ran the code, it was the same. And so I wanted to look more into generative, and I don't know why I gravitated exactly towards images, but I was drawn more towards that. And in general, like, I do enjoy like art that I can hang on my walls. And I think that, that's typically the way I like to think about my art too.
Got it. That makes sense. And I love these ghost wave ones. These are
Yeah.
This is giving me EKG vibes here a little bit.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
And that's a question. Like, do you feel like you brought elements of your work into your art, or do you continue to bring that outside of Excel and some of the grid stuff?
Yeah, I do. I think a lot of my art it works on like a very structured kind of basis, like grids, sine waves here. There's typically like some sort of fundamental simple structure underneath that I then like to like kind of break and introduce noise or randomness to. And so I do think that those are kind of what I fall back on, like those kind of like like sine waves and grids, like things that I are very much like my engineering wheelhouse. I think pop up a lot. It's like a lot of straight lines, a lot of like rigid grid structures, but then really like kind of breaking those up a bit. I think that's a signature of my work.
Got it. I mean, I love it. And those are also like natural processes. I think they tend to draw us in as well. Okay, so you start with the wave frames, you get it started, and then what came next?
I think those accidental moire patterns did. So I think those were like this was a bug. I mean, these were computer bugs. They're code bugs that I think I was trying to do like a sunflower pattern, which is like there's like I can't remember the equation. There's some exponential equation that describes like a sunflower's seeds, how they're arranged. It's like it's a pattern that repeats a lot through nature. And I was trying to recreate that, and I introduced some bug in my code, and these kind of popped out, which were really cool. And so that was kind of an embrace of the bug, is what these were. And yeah, I think these were on Hicketnook back, can't remember how long ago, over 2 years ago.
And those first ones that went to the funny guys, were those also on Hicketnook?
Those were open. I think I listed them on OpenSea, minted them on OpenSea. They're Ethereum.
So how did they even find you at that point?
The funny guys were trying to bring a lot of people over to Ethereum and get their first like Genesis pieces at the time, I think. And I think I heard that most of their stuff came from Caleb. What's Caleb's last name? Caleb Og? No, I can't remember. He's got a yellow Twitter. What is it? I should have known this. But he's like a prolific retweeter, and he's a really great artist. And I think that the funny guys found a lot of the stuff they were getting from him, from his retweets. So they reached out to me, and I minted those.
Got it. Awesome. And yeah, you have so many of these beautiful one of ones that my guess is folks haven't seen.
Yeah, those are on those one of ones there. On the top, like those three across the top. Those are all on Foundation. That was the summer of 21. I think I did a lot of Foundation pieces, one of ones.
Got it. And yeah, I mean, would love to hear what artistic intent you had behind these, what you were playing around with, because they seem quite distinct.
Yeah, the shards one on the left, I really like how it's and there's three different pieces. There's like circles, squares, and triangles, and I really like how these work at different scales. So they're and I don't know how high the image resolution is here, but they're kind of operating on a flow field, and they kind of look like almost kind of sharp when you're really close, and they look kind of like fuzzy or soft when you're kind of middle distant, and then they look just kind of like basic shapes from far away. And I really enjoyed that, like kind of how the piece kind of looked different depending on how closely you looked at it. And like incorporating that kind of detail was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. We can check these out on Foundation, and these the shattered ascent and descent, and these shades. Actually, maybe you could talk about these shades. These look like they were the earliest ones on Foundation. These are quite beautiful, and you're introducing. I mean, you had the waveforms, but I guess I see the resemblance now. I was going to say there's curves here, but I can see the sine wave a little bit
Yeah, there's
now as
sine
well.
waves there. Yep, there's sine waves, and then they almost look like they're hand drawn with like charcoal or something. But yeah, very much that sine wave kind of thing coming through again with those. And yeah, these were my first Foundation pieces. I think Blackbird bought all three of them. He liked them a lot, and yeah, I loved those. I thought about making this too into like a longer form series, but they were really special, I think, and they just stand alone. So I like pieces a lot.
These are very, very beautiful, and there's like there's a simplicity to your work. I mean, you have the complexity, of course, in these shapes. Incorporating the waves with different kind of more rigid structures, but there's also a simplicity to all your pieces. How do you think about that? How do you think about framing the piece, and what is sort of the main actor in the piece, if you will?
Yeah, I'm I guess it's hard for me to put words to, but I really am just drawn to that like the simple, minimal kind of aesthetic. Like that really just pulls me in, and it really like those are the pieces that other people do that I'm most drawn to and excited about. And I don't know exactly what it is, but those are just they resonate with me. Like the simple pieces, the simpler the piece. I mean, if it can be simple and still like evoke like a strong response or an emotion, like I think that is a pretty strong, thing about it. And I think that's what excites me about minimalism. So I do enjoy minimalism to a point, for sure. And like those monuments pieces there, yeah, at the top are very kind of simple, but I like those are probably my favorite of what I have on Foundation. Like I love those pieces.
Yeah, these
That's pretty intriguing. That it's cool to hear your perspective as like almost an observer of your own art.
Yeah, like I would probably hang those monuments on my wall first. Like those are the ones that I love the most.
Well, if you're gonna hang it on the wall, you gotta take off that bent behind you and not your child's work.
That's fair. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, so then let's talk about when long form came into the picture, and how did you think about I wasn't aware. I guess Echoes and Orbits was probably the first one over on FX Hash.
Bent was the first one.
Oh, Bent was the first one. Okay, yeah. So apologies for that.
No, that's fine.
That these were in chronological order.
Yeah, I guess I put Bent at the top because it's
of course, the Artblocks Curated. So first of all, I mean, that must have been amazing to have your first long form be in Artblocks highest tier. We'd love to hear your story. You said you spent 8 months on it, so a really long time. What was the intent with that, and what kind of aesthetic were you going for?
Yeah, that too like fell out kind of accidentally from something else I was working on. So bents are based on like a triangular isometric grid underneath, and I can't remember what all is in this web page, but yeah, so you can see the grid there on the that's kind of the grid, and then it gets broken up into smaller triangles, and then some of those get filled with these lines, and then some of them get bent. That's the next step, and then some of them get shaded, and then color is applied in texture. So these very much were an accident. I was working on this isometric grid, because I like starting with a grid, and I was trying to figure out ways to tile and fill these grids with different things. And at one point I did these lines like kind of by accident, and then started rotating them, and this like structure popped out, and it evolved quite a bit from when I started working on it. I think the original thing I actually did was for plotter postcards. I was mailing out plotter postcards for fun, for free to people, and I was so I was having to make a lot of art because they were all unique, and these filling these triangles with these lines was one of the things I plotted first and was sending to people, and then it evolved from there. But yeah, it was kind of it was an accident, and then it just evolved a lot.
Got it. I mean, I love that. I love how you are seeing these accidents and flowing through them, and just love to hear, because I don't ask enough. Like, what was it like to hear that you're going to be an Artblocks Curated, sort of participate in the madness there? My guess is that was the first time your art had gotten that much attention at once by the nature of being curated in this larger drop. Like, could walk us through that. I'd love to hear what that was like.
Yeah, that whole process was crazy and a whirlwind. I mean, it's still hard to even remember. It was just so like out of body experience almost. I mean, well, first of all, it was like I applied in July, I think, and at the time they were only opening up applications like every 4-6 months or something. And then there was like a mad dash to like get your application in quick, so you were at the top of the line. And so that was nerve-wracking. Like I was always on I think it was Discord, like checking if the applications were open like every day. So I finally got the application in. And then I still had a few months to work on it, as the applications were like, they were going through the ones that they had received. And I think it was October when I got, in. And I mean, fortunately, I think it was like 2021. I think the bar was a little lower at the time. Like they were accepting a lot more. There weren't nearly as many generative artists trying to get on the platform. So I was kind of fortunate, I think, in that regard too. I mean, I think that, I don't know if Bent would be curated today. Like the bar has been, the rejection rates increased a lot, and the bar for curated's like gotten super high.
I don't know. You should. You're being very humble. I mean, very well, good project and well received. Maybe there is more submissions, but I mean, this is a really dope project, man.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but I did feel lucky though. I did feel lucky to have gotten it at the time, and I feel lucky now and fortunate.
I gotta echo Jared though. I mean, it's funny, as we've gone through all these various collections, there's not that many collections where I say this is long form done really well. Like this is an algorithm that supports 1,000 pieces and it has great variety. And I really think you nailed it there, to be honest. So I personally think as well, you would have been accepted, but
right. I wasn't fishing for compliments. Thank you, guys.
No, I know you weren't. I know you weren't, but this is one of those collections, honestly. And I didn't realize how much detail you had on the website about Bent. I mean, this is such an amazing resource here. If we did a deep dive on Bent, I would basically just read off of this at this point, because you did all the work. So for anybody listening, this is a great place to come and check out. And I think that this collection is just so cool. My engineering brain loves it, and the way that you create these optical illusions, it's like kind of partly a maze, some MC Escher type vibes that I get out of it. A lot of things look different depending on the way that you look at it. And last question I wanted to ask you on Bent itself is, you mentioned you spent a lot of time on it. There was those time pressures as folks were trying to get their submissions in. How did you decide when it was done? Or what's the closest an artist can hope to get to feeling comfortable with something based on your experience?
Yeah, that is very hard, because it does feel like there's always another element to add. There's always another color palette to explore. There's always another like knob to turn. It is really hard with these long form algorithms that are so like open-ended in a sense. Like you can write the algorithm in a way to produce, like, if you could, to produce like tens of thousands of pieces that all look unique. And so it is really hard. It's a challenge to like draw the line. Fortunately here it was like there was almost like a deadline. It was like I got in the application process. It was like, okay, we need to see the work now. Okay, we're ready to review it now. And there's some leeway there, of course, but it's almost, I mean, like I could still work on Bent. Like I could work on algorithms for years and like never feel like they're done. So yeah, defining that line is really tricky. And that was one of the reasons I started releasing that sketch series too, was like picking that line is hard. Like deciding when to be done with something is difficult. And so I liked like releasing things along the way with sketch. But yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good answer because it's tough. And I almost never feel done when I'm done.
So I have to ask, because I was kind of teasing at this earlier, but I want to segue off of Bent and the grid system, but the work in progress that you posted on March 18th, it feels like this really, really cool, I'll call it amalgamation of almost imposter syndrome with that triangular grid from Bent, and then this almost underlying you introduce these like circular shapes, which isn't necessarily, which shows up a little bit in imposter syndrome, but I would say is more like a nod to sketch D. Like, so two things is like, one, is this like is this a sampling of what we can come to expect? And then if I'm gonna push you on the spot, is there anywhere to expect this?
Yeah, so there is somewhere to expect this. So I think I'm at liberty to talk about this. And this is probably going to come out. This might come out after it's dropped. I'm not sure. It's still a work in progress. But yeah, so this does use a isometric grid, kind of like Bent. It's also using kind of like a packing method, where the shapes usually don't overlap. There are cases when they do. But it's fitting, triangles in there, of course, because it's a triangular grid, but also circles can take up a certain number of triangles, and hexagons are in there too. And so, yeah, it's kind of a packing algorithm that's being used. But then, of course, texturized, and there's gradients, and there's some kind of sketched lines over top. And but yeah, I'm really excited for this. I've pushed it pretty far, I think. And I'm working with Foundation for Art on Blockchain, who is creating so they're a nonprofit, and I'm probably going to maybe butcher some of this, but their mission is kind of to use art to fund more art, to fund creativity, to fund up and coming Web3 artists, not just generative artists. And so
this is awesome. The monocolor that's on screen right now.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that one. Yeah,
absolutely, like mind-blowingly good. With I mean, you have that large dark hexagon kind of as a focal point, but then supplemented by all these adjacent lighter shapes that like you said, with the circle packing, just get deeper in there. And then there's just even the polarity and the polarizing nature of like a circle and a hexagon and different packing shapes. It's pretty and anybody who's listening to this audio only, strongly encourage you to go just check it out. But I didn't mean to pressure you into saying where it's going to be released. I'm super excited by this one in particular. I think it's a very, very beautiful algorithm, and we always try to tease this out, but as an observer, it feels like that natural progression of some of your pieces where and this is intended as a compliment, the maturity of your work starts to like come together, and this really feels like a really great amalgamation of a lot of your different projects. And although I subconsciously saw it just talking today, it kind of like teased it out to be a little bit more front and center. But I mean, absolutely beautiful work. And for anybody who can't see it, it's got pretty typical Ippsketch coloring and dimensioning to it. It's just overall very, very beautiful. I mean, the one on screen, I would just be honored to have. So is this going to be a long form, or is this going to be
it'll be long form? 300 editions is the plan right now, and it's using the engine, the Artblocks engine, and with this nonprofit, and half of the proceeds are going to go towards the nonprofit, to continue to fund other artists through grants. And actually, I believe a DAO is going to be formed from the collector base. And so collecting the mint will actually be a kind of a token of participation. And then the DAO is going to kind of drive a lot of the charitable contributions that are made from the treasury. So I'm really excited about that aspect too. I mean, I love the art. I'm excited to get the art out there, but I love the mission of the nonprofit too. So
I mean, that's to come full circle on kind of what we talked about earlier, like authenticity and just the selfless approach to a lot of your art is very admirable. I hope this garners some of the attention that you deserve, and as part of your journey, it's allows for the admiration of a lot of people along the way. You're doing an exceptional job, and thank you for everything you do. I know not everybody on crypto Twitter and NFT Twitter is like apt to say that right out the gate, but you're very generous with your time. And side note, you're a lot taller in person, is what we saw in Marfa than on screen. So, fun fact and a lighter side of
I'm
this
6'4".
IRL stuff.
Yes, that's true.
And Jeff, what was the name of the nonprofit where this will be releasing? I just want to highlight it because that sounds like a cool organization.
Yeah, it's Foundation for Art on Blockchain.
Oh,
I don't know if it's one word. If you space it out.
Yeah, you're right. I've found that it's actually easier to just Google this stuff than try to search on Twitter. No offense to Elon Musk. And then you find their Twitter account. There we go.
Interesting.
So
yeah, that's the one.
Here it is for folks. That's awesome. And so this organization, their proceeds will go back towards supporting artists who are trying to enter Web3.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's right. And this will be the first drop, and they'll probably be doing more. And a lot of the proceeds from those drops will be going to fund that treasury, and then providing grants and other things to up and coming artists. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's exciting. And kind of going back to part of the earlier conversation, how did you decide to go ahead and work with them? Was it just purely the mission, or were you also considering like we're talking about diversifying your collector base, which I know sounds like evil and strategic, but I'm just curious. Yeah.
I think there's an evil way to look at that, but there's a good way to look at that too. No, I think it was more about the mission. I mean, they reached out to me. The main person who's working with the foundation, who's kind of running it, is based in Austin, where I am. So we met for coffee and chatted about it and decided to work together. I was very excited for what their the mission statement of the foundation and what they're going to support, and so I was happy to be involved. And then it's also a Artblocks engine project, which I kind of I like. I feel like that lends some credibility to the project in a way.
Yeah, it's certainly. We've gotten spoiled by Artblocks. I think people forget that issues can come up, like mints happening properly, and technical issues, and certainly the Artblocks engine helps to alleviate some of those concerns.
Yeah, and I think everybody's hesitant of scams and wary of those sorts of things, and I feel like something coming on out of engine, I mean, it does carry a bit more, reputability. And maybe might put some people at ease a little more. Also, I like that aspect too.
100%. And I gotta echo Jared on this art. This is unbelievably beautiful, and I love how you incorporated certain features, like inversions here that were kind of features in your other projects, but you mixed them all into a single piece. Really cool to see. And as we're kind of getting close to wrapping up here, Jeff, I wanted to ask you, you've been in the space for 2 years now. You've seen it evolve a lot. We've gone through crazy elation of price, followed by currently, which feels like crazy depression of sentiment. What are you most excited about coming up? It doesn't have to be a single thing, but we'll keep it positive. Like, what are you excited about for the space?
I mean, I am excited for the possibility that this will become much more kind of mainstream. and reach more and more people. I think that's the thing that excites me the most. I mean, we're not there yet. It's still there's still quite a bit of friction to getting in this space. Like crypto is still really weird for a lot of people, and NFTs are spooky and it feels scammy sometimes. But I think there's a real potential for some serious growth here. And I think that really excites me. I mean, it's a way to get art into a lot more people's hands that really haven't had a good way to collect it up to this point. And I think that the potential for that is really exciting to me.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of us who are in the industry and seeing things happen every day, where you're seeing inroads to that. You're seeing more museums pop up, more organizations that are trying to onboard traditional art collectors. And of course, when prices turn around, that'll attract a lot of attention. A bunch of folks will stay beyond just the price and get integrated into the ecosystem. And you have a very interesting viewpoint, I'm sure, because you have a day job, and unlike me, you talk to people outside of the community. Do people even know about NFTs? Like some of your colleagues, like what is have people heard about art NFTs? And I mean, maybe because they know you, and probably you've talked about it, but or maybe not. Maybe you keep that completely separate.
Yeah, it's separate. Yeah, I don't tell them that I'm a NFT artist, crypto artist, generative artist who happens to be selling crypto or NFTs. No, I mean, there's, I have run across quite a few people who doubt the longevity of crypto, the sincerity of it, who think it's a scam. I mean, I think there's a lot of sentiment out there. Most of the normal people, like the day-to-day people I run into in my normal life, I guess I'll say, feel like that way. And I think that there's going to be quite a bit of education that's needed and time too. I mean, it's just going to take time to get more people in. But the potential's definitely there for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to put myself in my own shoes when I first heard about crypto. And I remember a big barrier for me was even understanding how the current financial system works in order to understand why a crypto financial system could be better in some ways. And similarly, my guess is it'll be the same with the art sides for folks who don't really understand how the art market works. And it's exciting. I'm excited for that too. I think it's definitely going to happen. I'm irrationally optimistic about this stuff, but I don't know. It feels inevitable to me. And what's in store for you? I mean, I know you mentioned this next release, but as you look at 2023, are you thinking you'll have another long form, closer to 1,000? Are you thinking a bunch of one-of-ones? Obviously, you don't need to reveal anything, but I'm just curious if you've mapped that out and how you're thinking about it.
Sure. Yeah, I don't have plans yet beyond this drop that's coming up that we were just looking at. I mean, I think one thing that I have been thinking about more and getting excited about, so friendship bracelets, right, came out last year, and I loved that it had like the instructions to make the bracelets, in the NFT. You can like click through and it tells you which string to buy and how to make it, and it walks you through all the steps. It's like assembly instructions. And this like idea of kind of like one of X, like fabrication, or like creating something tangible through the set of instructions. I mean, I think that speaks a lot to my like mechanical engineering background. Like when I design a part, I like make a drawing, and that drawing has dimensions and tolerances and material specifications. And those are kind of the instructions. And then the part is what ends up getting made. And I think that there's some potential for some overlap there. And that's kind of an area I want to explore a little bit. I think as a mechanical engineer and an artist, and I don't exactly know what that means yet, but that's one area that I want to look into a little more soon.
That's so cool. It's got me thinking. You were talking about with imposter syndrome, how you're considering making sets. Maybe if you complete a set, you release the blueprints to go and create something. Maybe an LVAD, Jeff. No, I'm just kidding. Don't try to make one of those at home.
No, do not.
That's fantastic. And you know, speaking of your day job, do you think you would ever go full time as a generative artist?
Yeah, I've thought about it. I think I could. I think that well, no, I don't want to. I think I really enjoy having um kind of my engineering career, like something that is productive or like is really tangible, and then also having this creative side too. I really enjoy having both things in my life, and I can't see like giving either of them up. And that's the way I think about it, is like it would feel like giving something up if I chose one and not the other, because I really enjoy both. I think Aaron Pinay, Artblocks, he works as an engineer for Artblocks, but he's also an artist. Like he and I have spoken about this a few times. Like he really likes also having like, because he could have gone full time too, I think, as an artist. But I think it's like I enjoy the engineering and the art too much to think about not doing one of them.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
super interesting because I think there's a perception that certainly I had this assumption that you're helping me test or really break that if you want to really like more time as an artist is better than less. But now I'm thinking about earlier in our conversation, you mentioning the kind of not clear deadline, but effectively the deadline to get bent in for the curated as more and more folks are trying to get curated projects in. And, you know, perhaps that constraint of having the day job and limiting the hours you have to work on your art is actually helpful. And so for folks who are listening, maybe artists who are saying, oh, I got to find a way to go full time, then it'll really take off. Maybe that's not quite the right way to think about it.
Yeah, I think I would definitely agree with that. So I don't feel like more time in art necessarily would make me a better artist. Like I do feel like there's a limit to how many hours in a day I could make productive art. And so there's like diminishing returns. And so I don't think that my art would, flourish very much if I were to dedicate more time to it necessarily. And I think also, having that balance like allows me to have kind of also like external viewpoints on things. Like I also think about other not art related things, but then I can bring those in to my art. And so having, like a well-rounded like life, I guess, allows you to bring in other things too. I think that's important as well.
I admire that. I think that there's a world where both are complementary and you can do both. I think that making it binary of like you have to do this or that. It's nice to have the optionality, but it's cool to also hear your perspective where one can influence and inspire the other. And I think that you get to contribute on multiple fronts. So that's super, super cool to hear, man. Honestly, I admire that perspective. It's probably hard to say it out loud. I don't know about that because sometimes I feel like you're forced to be in like one camp or the other. But again, it's just the one of the things I'm taking away from here is the authenticity that you bring to this, man. It's super, super, super amazing to just hear the person behind the art and your story. It's just gives me more and more conviction not only on your art but the space in general, because it's there's real people here behind the art, and it personalizes it.
Yeah, there's a real person behind that, a king of spades, right? Like
there's a real Jeff. We don't know what the Jeff is.
Don't know the last name, no. But there is a real person named Jeff.
There's a real Jeff for sure.
Yeah, and that's why like these real life events, like NFT NYC is coming up. Marfa, like you mentioned, like the Artblocks meetup in Marfa, like those were really powerful to me because it is hard. Twitter's kind of and Discord are like this weird digital silo where it's easy to get kind of like tunnel vision and you can get to the point of like not seeing avatars as real people. And so meeting in real life and like doing these kind of things has like really been really great for me. I think also because it's like there's no artist who like live next door or anything. I don't meet artists for coffee or anything. It's hard you can feel really isolated in this space sometimes. And so these real life face-to-face meetups are like really, really great.
Oh yeah, we're very much looking forward to NFT NYC, and we were both at Marfa. I did the whole tour, Marfa, Mexico City for the Bright Moments release, and then a quick break for Thanksgiving, then off to Art Basel. So it was maybe too much to do all 4 or all 3 in a row, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to. So you'll be out at NFT NYC?
No.
Oh no. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
unfortunately,
I can't make it. I wanted to make it. I was almost going to be there. I will be in Marfa again, which is September this year. So
perfect. Well, so folks, if you want to meet Jeff, you got to make the pilgrimage to Marfa,
West Texas.
and we will certainly be there. But just want to be respectful of your time. Just any parting words you have for our audience or anyone else listening?
Oh, I don't think so. I think I've said it all. But I mean, thank you both so much for this. It's been really great to talk to you both, and yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Jared, any parting thoughts for the listeners?
Seriously, check out the work. I think one of the things I love about Jeff's work is there, as mentioned, there's entry points at every single price point. I feel it's very reasonable, and we didn't double click on it too much, but I love the concept of sets and collecting and how you're thinking progressively about that. So I'm optimistic and eager to see how that unfolds. Thank you for all of your generosity in the space. Really, really strongly encourage everybody to check out the work in progress that may be public by the time this releases, but very, very interesting. I mean, you can tell by the early collectors, whether it's the funny guys or Blackbird, there's people who are taking notice. And I think that for me, paired with a deeper understanding of your authenticity and passion, I think that you are a force to be reckoned with, man. I really look forward to your journey, Jeff. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and the only other thing I want to add, Jared is always eloquent and amazing at these. So I will add only one thing. Take a look at Jeff's website. I mean, I think Jeff, I really mean this as a compliment. You can see the progression of your work, starting from the wave frames and the motion and getting into the grids, getting into these geometric shapes, mixing it all up all the way here to what you have here, which is just, it's really, really, really good. And kudos to you for continuing to push the boundaries in that progression. And the other thing I'll say is for folks listening, I think it opens up the possibilities of, I don't have to quit my job. I can work on this. I can tinker on it. I can push myself. And, even for me, like Jared's like, oh, man, maybe I can make some art while having 3 jobs basically now. just kidding, Jared. You might have to slow down on some of those things before getting to Jeff's level. But
there's 2 public jobs and one is not officially announced yet. So maybe in the coming weeks we'll have another announcement. But yeah, the art would be, honestly, I love the way Jeff does it, man, which is it's a compliment to other things and find inspiration from it. I've said this before, but I run around sneaking photos of my kids' chalk art and Play-Doh creations because I look at it and I'm just like, holy shit, this is beautiful in its own right. I love the way these colors come together. One day I'm gonna do it, No,
that's right. And I appreciate you sharing that, Jeff, and your perspective there. And the last thing I'll say to embarrass you before we finish is kudos for still being here. I mean, you started early. It's 2 years in. You're still here. You're still making art. And I'm sure part of that is your ability to have that balance at work and that longevity. So, congrats. We're excited to see what you come up with next. And, we again, thank you for your time and sharing.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm not planning on going anywhere. So I'm excited. I'll be here.
We have to. You heard it here, folks. So until next time, follow Jeff. We'll have everything in the show notes. We appreciate everybody tuning in, and we'll see you then. Thank you for tuning into Collector's Corner. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen. If you like this episode and want to help us out, please subscribe and leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice, like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and follow us on YouTube. Please also follow us on Twitter for announcements as we expand to other social and content platforms. Our Twitter handle is @collectors_XYZ. We'd also love to hear any feedback you have, so please comment or reach out. We're always striving to be more useful and get better so we can help you in your collecting journey.
The Collectors Corner team and their guests are not registered investment advisors. All views expressed on this podcast are personal opinions and are not specific inducements to make particular investments or investment strategies and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. This show is solely for informational and entertainment purposes only. Before making any financial decisions, please consult a professional.